Okay, thanks everyone for coming. Excited to have so many people in the room who are excited about UX and content strategy and not just Drupal sessions. So it's exciting. I specifically proposed this session because it's not technical. And I'm excited to share some ideas about UX and content strategy, but not ideas that I'm trying to pitch you to go and do. So the whole point of this session is to kind of challenge some trends, to hold them up to the light and see, like, should you actually do this thing on your website? And I know maybe some of you in the room are planning some kind of redesign in the near future or big overhaul of your site. Anybody doing in that kind of phase? They have a website they're trying to rebuild. Anyone, a developer, you're working on 10 different websites at the same time, maybe? More in that camp. Or maybe you have a website that you're perfectly happy with until the boss comes along and says, I heard about this thing called a design system. Do we need a design system? And so, yeah, my talk is kind of, I'm going to be discussing some of those decisions. So my name is Suzanne Dergacheva. I'm one of the co-founders of Evolving Web, and I've also been contributing to the Promote Drupal initiative to market Drupal, as well as Drupal CMS in the last few months. So I'd love to talk to you about any of those things. You heard a bit about Evolving Web at the opening session. So we do a lot of things in Drupal, also a lot of UX and strategy work. So love to chat with you about that as well. So the 4 big ideas that I'm going to be presenting today, these I picked. I'm not going to say I picked them at random, but I picked them because they came top of mind when I think about redesign projects or people coming to us looking for help. Flattening your navigation, storytelling, digital storytelling, design systems, and the revenge of the homepage. Are people actually coming to your homepage anymore? So I'll go through them one by one. So the first idea is flattening your navigation. So I think this is interesting because I think the first time I heard about this idea of having a really flat main menu structure was a long time ago, like maybe 15 years ago, like someone talking about the idea of just having everything available in your main menu. And then we went through this whole phase of the mega menu. Who here has a mega menu? Or has designed one? Yeah. And it's like, okay, at first it's because somebody decided to link to everything in the menu. Everything has to go in the menu. And then you couldn't decide what was going to be in there. And then you decided to start picking other things to highlight. Like, oh, we put 10 things in this one drop down. So we better also have a big block that tells you what the most important thing is. Or the other thing that comes up a lot in these designs is like, it's really hard to pick one word that describes what this page is that we're linking to. So we're going to have the one word, and then we're also going to have a little description, which is what we just added to the Drupal.org redesign, if anyone's looked at Drupal.org recently. And so this idea of like a big mega menu that's supposed to link to all the most important things on your site starts to become a bit overwhelming, and I think people are trying to go back to the flattened menu approach. So it tends to be, I think, people who have gone through this process of sticking everything into their menu and designing something fancy, who maybe want to go back to a more simplified approach. And when I look at it from an outsider perspective, and this is really just a website that I picked at random, when I look at ways to give, and there's just so many ways to give, maybe I'm going to find that a little bit too much information, a little bit overwhelming, and I can see why a flattened approach would make sense. But that being said, I don't think anyone should go about redesigning their site with this idea of like, the goal is to flatten the menu, or the goal is to have a mega menu. Like that's not a goal. That's like a design technique to get around, the thing you're trying to communicate. And so I wanted to talk a little bit through how we actually decide, how do we decide how people are supposed to find our content? So this is called wayfinding, right? Like design strategies that help users actually figure out where to go on your website. And the navigation is just one piece of that. So I was trying to think of like every single way that people could find content on your site. So the most basic would be like, if you really want somebody to know a piece of information, literally putting that in a block on every single page, or having an alert that pops up to tell them, like in the case of the Oxfam, like the donate link is always there. There's always going to be something calling you to donate. That's the number one priority items. And then there's all these different options for how people can get to content via navigation or links. So linking from the main menu is one, but you could also have, a CTA in a major landing page, links within content, these related or suggested items, listings, or some other link options. And then the kind of fallbacks are, well, people can just search for that. That page, it's not accessible through the menu anywhere. It's not a big CTA on the home page, but if you really wanted to find it, you could do a search. And I think originally I had two things under search, like search, where something actually shows up because it's going to be prioritized at top of the list, and search where you have to scroll down to the 5th page. How hard do you want to make something be to find? So some other things in there. XML sitemap, okay, you really don't want people to find it. So these are kind of all the options, and maybe we want to prioritize. Certain ones. So we know that if we put something on every page, people are going to see it. We know that if we link something from the main menu, that people are going to know that it's important to us. And then if we have a kind of more major CTA, it's also a signaling mechanism of how important it should be. So looking at this menu kind of more critically, I think we can see that we can come up with a way of deciding what should actually go in a main navigation. So there's the category of items here that we could look for that people just expect to find in the main navigation. If they don't see it there, they're going to assume it doesn't exist anywhere. So something like having a way to see what your organization does, or the services associated with you. So this would be like the number one priority of thing to put into the main nav. Users expect to find main actions through the primary navigation, and you could probably figure out what these should be through a user journey mapping exercise. Putting something in the footer is kind of a signal that it's not important, so it's a useful place to put things that you know are important to be persistent, but that aren't part of anyone's primary journey. If you map out what your primary users want to do through the site, and there's something that doesn't show up there, but you have to have it there, maybe for some legal reason, that would be a reason to put it in the footer. So some content users won't ever look for in the main nav. So I think this is a really good category of items to look for. Is there content that is not part of anyone's user journey, but you really want them to be exposed to it? So I'm thinking of things like student spotlights. So we're at a university, so that's where my mind is. I'm thinking of okay, we want students to pick their programs, and we want them to see other students who have gone through these programs. So let's create a student spotlight section. And then you link to that in the menu, and then no one ever goes to that link, because who's looking for student spotlights when they come to your website? No one. So there's maybe categories of content that, even though they're important and we want people to go there, we don't want to put it in the main nav because no one's actually going to click on it. And instead, we need to find other ways of weaving that content in. So using some of the other techniques, like having CTAs within other major pages, using related content blocks might be more appropriate.
Does that have any effect on your SEO in terms of the engines use your sitemap to find their way, or I don't know? Does that not make a difference?
Does that have any effect on your SEO? So if you're only embedding content in other pages and not having separate landing pages for content, does it affect your SEO?
And not having the links in the menu,
Not
relying
having the
on
links on the
them
menu.
being, large call to actions on some page instead.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think there's anything inherently, like obviously the SEO, from an SEO perspective, the main navigation, if it's at the top of the page, those links are important. But there's a whole host of things that go into SEO and ways that links are shown to be important. I think it would depend on what is on the content that you're linking to those pages on from other pages. I think, I haven't thought about that specific aspect of it.
Can I ask a question? Or?
Yes.
How would you know that the page is important from a user perspective? Through analytics or?
Oh, good question. How do you know that the page is important from a user perspective? So analytics are useful for that, to show you what are people going to based on your current user experience. But the problem with analytics is that if you think the content is important, but nobody's finding it because of some user experience issue that you have right now, it won't show up as being important in the analytics. So analytics is going to show you some of the most important pages on your site, but it's not exclusive. There'll be other pages and content that are important. So what we do is, and I have an example of this later, is we use user journey mapping to make sure that we're going through, for my most important users, what are the most important tasks they want to do, and what are all the steps and content they need to do that task, and are all of those things easily accessible for them.
And for the user journey, do you include like people with disabilities? I mean, do you like the sample of
Yeah,
users?
the question is for user journey mapping.
Yeah.
Do we include people with accessibility challenges? It would be like we would make sure that all of the wayfinding techniques here are accessible. So we assume that somebody who needs to use their keyboard to access the menu, that they can do that.
Or
So
screen reader.
we don't need to really plan a different user journey for those users, I think, in most cases. So so this is going to result maybe in some changes you want to make to your sitemap, to your main navigation, and then one important step that you might consider doing is a low cost usability testing, using tree testing for your navigation. If there's certain items that you're not sure make sense to include, you're not sure what the labels should be, tree testing is a great way to resolve those kinds of questions. So it's basically presenting a user, instead of the whole interface of the website, you're just presenting them with the navigation, and then asking them to do a task and seeing if they're able to find that through navigation. So it's helpful for making decisions about navigation specifically, but of course there might be other ways that you expose the users to the content, other techniques you're using, so it's not going to answer every question. It makes sense to try to optimize your UX first. So some major takeaways about your menu. Designing a big menu can be expensive, so going in and just redesigning it is a big job, so maybe think twice about doing it. Whereas just changing the links in your menu can be relatively cheap. Like when we were talking about Drupal.org improvements, one of the first things we did was like, what can we just move around or relabel in the menu to make this easier to use? The hard part, of course, is just deciding what the links should be in the first place. And then tree testing is a really great technique, especially because you don't want to be experimenting a ton with your main nav. It's one of the things on your site that people kind of expect to stay relatively permanent. They don't expect it to change every time they visit, so your decisions are important from that perspective. So the next big trend I want to talk about is storytelling content, kind of like digital storytelling. So who here has heard about this as something they should do? Anyone who's written an RFP in the last 10 years has been writing we need more storytelling content on our website, and it doesn't even matter what kind of website they have, everybody's asking for storytelling content. And I think it's interesting because a lot of the organizations we work with are institutions, and so they're trying to emulate, what media organizations are doing. They're trying to connect more to their users. And so what is storytelling content? Well, I think people mean this mix of content that feels more immersive, feels more engaging, isn't just walls of text. So often we see, landing pages that have a mix of different components, like media, calls to action, maybe some type of form, videos. A lot of interactive elements people talk about, like I want to add in a little timeline or a map that you can actually engage with better as a user. And inherently, all of this content mixes actual pieces of content with something more like a layout or a style, or like how does this get on the page to make it more interesting to users. I always think about this as being like picture books for websites. So if it's interactive, it has like for toddlers like little flaps you can open, and there's always like lots of pictures on the page, and there's this kind of balance of meaning and story along with visuals. But I think the thing that people kind of forget, because they get swept up in all the visuals, is that the flow of content in storytelling content is really important. Like, to tell a story, there needs to be some kind of like ordering of things on the page. And that's actually probably the most important attribute. So when we're designing a site, these are some screenshots from Queen's University. They have all these components that they need, right, to communicate different kinds of things. They need listing of events. They need a call to action. They need a link into a map or a set of research content that they want to expose. And so designing all those components is an important design step. But another important design step is just figuring out, the ordering of and the selection of those components for an important page to actually tell a story. So the purpose of this site is to appeal to researchers. What do researchers actually, how do we actually get them to flow through this, and then how do we get them to, get the whole picture of what we're trying to communicate? And also, how do we keep them engaged visually? So if we look at just the flow of elements, if a designer is putting together this page, they're going to be thinking not just about the story from a perspective of like narrative, but also from a perspective of visual rhythm. So I can't just have really super concentrated blue content everywhere. I need to have like some white space. So we see like there's a lighter component mixed in with a darker component, and kind of this play back and forth visually on the page. So this is all great. We can build these components, we can design these pages, we can come up with this flow. But the downside of storytelling content is that it's just much more expensive. So if you think about how much harder it is to build a page like this than to build a wall of content, like it's an extraordinarily more difficult and expensive task. It takes more time to create. There's just way more clicks. It's harder to update. I want to update, one link on this page. I probably have to click edit and then like find the component and go to edit the link. So it just takes me longer. It's harder to make it work with search because it's not just one piece of content, but there's a whole bunch of content that goes into this page. If you were to migrate this to the new experience builder on Drupal, that would probably be a bunch of extra work. And then it is harder, like it actually takes some design thinking, so just brain power-wise, to get the flow of this content right, versus just maybe writing up a short couple sentences or adding a page using a basic WYSIWYG editor. So storytelling content is expensive. So what are some ways that we can make it easier if you want to invest in this kind of content? So one thing that I always look for in projects is like, what is that really important content type where you want to use it to tell a story, but the story can kind of be templated. So again, thinking of picture books, I think of those like, the series of picture books where it's always kind of the same story, but maybe the characters are a little different and they've just kind of done a copy-paste job, but the story can still be good. So if we're looking at, like, this is a website for a design school in Toronto, and they have set of programs, of course, higher education. And so the program pages themselves are this really important decision point for their target users. They want, the school basically wants you to be able to make your whole decision about applying to this program from this page. But they also they know that they need to tell a story, and so some of the language on the page is trying to do that. It's trying to help the user picture themselves in the program, and they're able to then see a student who's gone through the program. And it's not captured here in the screenshots, but as you go through the page, there is a tiny bit of animation that just kind of invites you to go through in this flow and invites you to stay on that page and gives you the calls to action really in a persistent and predictable and prominent place. And so the fact that it is a template, it doesn't mean that it's doing a good job of telling a story. But it's important that the template has room enough to breathe to put in things like this spotlight, that there's places for that kind of conversational tone of voice. And I think that's what makes it work well, while being much less expensive than just saying, okay, content editors, you're going to do storytelling, you can put whatever you want on this page. It's going to be so much more work for them. Another kind of option similarly, this is a website for kind of a parks website, a parks website, so there's many different national parks you can visit, and it has also embedded in it road trips, which I think is really fun. Here is an exploration of how you can visit these parks while you're on a really cool road trip. But of course, every road trip is kind of different. One road trip you might visit 5 parks, another one you might visit only 1. You might want to highlight different things. It might be interesting to put some other landmarks in there too. And so the ability to mix and match components is really important when you're creating this content to make it more true to life and interesting. But it's also important to give some guidance around, not just having only text-based components, having enough images. And so I think an interesting thing we can do with storytelling content is giving some guidelines and best practices to the authors of the content to say, here's the types of components we suggest, here's how you can use them, and here's a great example of what they're going to look like with a good balance visually and narrative-wise. And then my last example is maybe there's one interaction on a website that you just really want to focus on because it's your main purpose for being. Why do you have a website? In this case, it's an institution that's helping connect people who want to get a new career with the trades. So instead of going to often to higher education, maybe you want to train for a specific trade, and here's maybe how to expose you to different trades you might be interested in if you don't come from a family that already knows about the trades, or if it's not something that you're really familiar with. So it presents a quiz, and so it's just enough interaction to get you interested and to make it feel like you're getting something back from the website. So there's more of a connection to the user. And our approach with this wasn't to say, oh, we think quizzes are a great way of creating this engaging storytelling content, so we're going to create a quiz builder and have all these quizzes. No, our approach was just, let's have one quiz, and then it's going to take you directly to this one type of content. And so it's an investment in that specific experience, and so we were able to do a good job but not break the budget on it. And so I consider this, a kind of selective approach. So overall with storytelling content, I think being selective in what you invest in is good, not just automatically converting everything into a big landing page with 1 million paragraphs or layout builder blocks. Using templates is good. It doesn't mean you're not telling a story. And then governance is extra important as soon as you give flexibility. So having some documentation, not just of here's technically how to add these components to your website, but more here's why you would use this component for this type of content is good. And I didn't add it, but some documentation around the design aspects as well, because you can easily, as soon as you start letting people mix and match components, they can easily create something that is not, maybe it's like technically in your brand guidelines, but it's not going to feel like a great experience. Next up is design system. So anyone here have a design system? The proud owner of a design system. Awesome. Great. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. And it's all the rage. How many of you have been to a conference presentation about design systems? Yeah, lots of us. Yeah. It seems like so good. Like theoretically, I think about it like, oh, of course, a design system, that makes so much sense. It's so intuitive. And I was looking back at, a presentation that I've been part of on design systems and presenting, here's what we did and why. And what really occurred to me is that a design system is a tool. So, okay, so what, I skipped this whole step of saying what a design system is, but basically, a design system is there to document how your brand is going to work in the digital context, not just for one website, but across channels. So typically, people use design systems because they have multiple websites, maybe on different platforms, and they want a way to standardize what the look and feel is, so that when you go from one website to the next, it doesn't feel like a jarring experience. And not just websites, of course, but other types of digital experiences too. Like maybe you want to use it on you have an app, or you have a portal, or you have some social media content. So it's something you could use across channels. And so when we look at design systems, it's like a form of documentation, and just like any documentation, it's something you have to maintain. So like, here's what our brand looks like today in all the components that we have, and we're going to use that to build 5 websites. That's a typical use case for design systems, maybe with some variations on different brands, things like you can kind of see is hinted at here. But really then you have this documentation that you have to keep up to date. And you might be making changes on those 5 websites and be adding new kinds of content where you need new documentation to be written. Things might go in different directions. So without actually a governance plan, a design system is not going to be that useful, because people are going to fall back from using it if it's not really up to date. And there might be other tools as well that you could consider. So getting a bit into like the details of why a design system is very useful. In our example here, there's actually a whole series of health websites, like public health websites. So there's one about mental health, there's like a children's hospital, there's also kind of a main institutional website for public health authority. So, you need to have the same kind of general feel, whereas you also want to have a bit of variation in terms of the actual logo that's used, in terms of the iconography and the aesthetic of the page. So a design system can help you handle that. So just one, I'm going to give another example, real world example where there is no design system. So this, I might be describing your situation, maybe. Again, a higher ed example. This is York University, university in Toronto, and they have many, many WordPress sites. So about 5-10 years ago, they said, okay, we're going to have a standard WordPress install, and we're going to have these things which we are confusingly going to call modules, but they're actually components. And here's a list of all of them. So there's 42, and here's what they look like. And this isn't, this is not a design system per se, but it's like a website where you can go in and click and see what each one is. And interestingly, they have a couple Drupal websites, and they also had to then go and figure out how to apply the same types of components to their Drupal sites. And I think it's a good example of when a design system could be really useful, because they have so many users of the design. It's not just a centralized team that's getting to make all the decisions about how the design is going to be presented on these sites. They actually have a lot of users in different departments who spend time on their websites, and need to know, not just a list of 42 components, but more like, how do I add these more strategically, and what, and how can I implement these effectively if I'm not using the WordPress installer? And a specific use case came up when their design school wanted help redesigning their website to add a bit more punch, and also to kind of like add some more types of content that aren't typically handled. Like design schools, music schools, they tend to have more going on. They have, a lot of events, they have, artist profiles, things like that. And so they really needed to have some extra things that were outside of these 42 pretty standard modules or components. And so in creating designing some of the new components, having a design system would have been really helpful, because we could have used the more granular pieces of the design system to build up the new components we were creating. It would have been probably easier to innovate and add some variation, and then also to have a way to kind of feed some of that back into the design system itself. So with design systems, if you're thinking about it, if it comes up at a meeting, like, should we add this? Thinking about governance first, and really making sure that there's a bigger governance plan is probably a important use of time. Considering your landscape, like thinking about what you're actually supporting and improving, like who are your users? Are they going to use this design system? And what channels does it need to be used for? Like, is it worth having something that is this big level of effort to document in this way? And then maybe if the project seems too big, maybe starting simple, like creating a style guide, creating a brand audit, going through what you have now is probably a good first step, and it's definitely going to be a lot less work. Okay, my last big idea, revenge of the homepage. So who has heard about this? Revenge of the homepage. Oh, this is kind of a cool idea, because it's like, all right, nobody likes Google search anymore, right? I used to type something into Google search and I'd be like, okay, I'm definitely going to find what I want. And now I type something into my Google search and I'm like, I'm definitely going to find some ads. And maybe I'll find what I want, or maybe it'll just pop up like the answers right there, but I don't actually get the link to the website. And like, I don't know, I find there's so much SEO laden content right at my fingertips, and I'm just kind of weary of it. And then, AI comes along. So like, has anybody delved into Google's AI mode yet? Has anybody been looking at this or hearing about this? So this is like, okay, every time you do a search on Google, like AI is going to be right there to help you out, and then you don't need to click on any links and go to any websites anymore. And so this idea of like predicting that people will actually use websites less, is going to maybe change the traffic of your site, because people might be getting information from it directly from AI and not actually clicking in and seeing the content as you've presented it. And so this kind of feels like a threat in a way, but it also kind of makes me think that like maybe this experience will be bad and people will just go back to bookmarking websites that they like to use. And so the homepage will get to kind of have its second day. So I do think it's something worth thinking about, and probably something that will come up in any conversation you have about, SEO, investing in SEO, or investing in how people find your website. And I think an interesting thing to think about is how you can take back the authority of being a resource that people actually go to and want to visit. This is an example of user journey mapping. So if you've never done user journey mapping before, might be interesting to you. The whole idea of it is you're thinking through, or user journey mapping, customer journey mapping is about the same thing, but maybe one step up where you're looking not so much just at the website. The whole idea is that you're thinking through the user experience, and usually you do a workshop where you're mapping this out with people who are actual users themselves, or who know the needs of your users very well. And you're thinking through the content and the features that you might want to offer through their perspective. So what are they thinking? What actually prompts them to go and start interacting with you? What are their first steps tend to be? Like, are they doing a Google search? Are they clicking on a link in a newsletter? And it kind of helps you map out how they're interacting with you, not just from the website perspective, but also from like an overall multi-channel perspective. And then it helps you identify opportunities at every step. Like if they're really confused at the registration step in their journey, or they get stuck on the details, like how do you help them unstick? What would be some useful content or feature at that point? So I find like when you're mapping things out, you're always mapping like what are users asking, what are they thinking, what are you offering them, and then what are the opportunities, and that tends to provide a lot of really great tidbits. And I think an exercise like this, you might want to flag specifically things that people can only do on your website. Like what are some unique experiences that you're offering that people, that are worth really investing in? That it's not just going to be content that they're going to get from an AI response. So I came up with some examples. So if you're like an insurance company, we do this website for a big insurance company, they have a lot of like calculators, right? Those are things that like, yeah, you want to go to the actual calculator and walk through the steps and get the results right from the source. If you're a library and you have all of these services that you offer and you link people to, like this is something fundamentally that people need to come to the source to get access to, like this whole confederated search and really rich data. If you're planning a trip up north, this is a website, bonjourquebec.com, that basically has all the travel experiences you can do in Quebec. So thousands, 100,000 of them, some odd, things you can explore doing. And actually looking at this on a map is a pretty unique experience. So it's going to be hard for somebody to just get this information from kind of an AI result. And it's quite immersive, and it's explaining the information in a way that also needs to be presented on the website. And so mapping out, user journey mapping is great, but also just mapping out how users are coming to your content. And you can, you might always think of searching on Google, you might just assume that they're coming to your homepage, but in fact, there's other ways that people are kind of interacting with you, and what do you want to lean on to make sure that they know that they should be using your website as this fundamental source of truth and really valuable thing that they want to interact with. So some key observations here. So you want to mapping out your journeys is really valuable, and you can do that when you're doing a redesign. It's a really common step in the process, but it's also something you might think of doing even when you're not redesigning and you just want to refocus the efforts of your website and figure out what you should invest more into. I think it's also important to know what your high-value touch points are and identify those opportunities. And then revenge of the homepage, so really like making your website something that people want to bookmark and come to, and I think that's a kind of inspiring thing, and we'll see where things go with Google searches and AI mode and all of this, but I think, I hope websites have a role to play, even though it might be changing. So summing it all up, hopefully you can avoid redesigning your website every 3 years, just because somebody comes along and says, we need to add a design system, let's redesign everything. Hopefully you can invest in key touch points on your website that are the most important for your users and for your business goals. And then governance is basically comes up in every single one of these questions of how do you make sure that what you're spending time on is going to actually be something content editors can use and that's going to bring value. So those are the big ideas, and I'd love to hear your thoughts and questions. Yes, Benji.
So you talked about in the storytelling section, you talked about how expensive it is to have the tabula rasa, where someone can build anything they want, and it tends to get these very nested things. It's expensive to build, it's expensive to maintain, it's expensive to migrate. So that actually ties in with your first point. The first point, your first section was flattening your menu structure, your navigation. Also flatten your content structure, because it's cheaper, it's easier to maintain, it's more consistent.
Yeah, simple as that.
Yeah, so the comment is about the kind of overlap of these ideas. So flattening your menu structure sounds very similar to like simplifying your content and not making your storytelling content so complex and varied.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts? Yes, Benji?
So the other thing I was thinking about, you spend a lot of time thinking about the navigation of Drupal.org, and thank you for that. I spend a lot of time thinking about the admin menu in Drupal. And for a long time, I've been thinking that hierarchical menu structure is one way to get the pages you need. It's not the only way. So I appreciate some of the other suggestions you made, search, related links, and so forth. And I hope that we can implement some of those ideas in revamping the Drupal admin UI.
Yeah, that's a great point. So the comment is about the admin menus also being something we consider, because the admin user experience is also important. And in Drupal, if you look at the new, like if you look at Drupal CMS, so being this newly designed nav for the backend, one thing that you notice is that some of the content is still in a hierarchy. Like you go in and you want to change your configuration, there's still that kind of menu you go into with nested menu items. But some of the menu has been flattened and basically said, okay, well, we know that creating content is one of the most important things, like let's just put that front and center. Or we know that like accessing your media library is a really important thing for content editors, so let's pull that link out and not nest it below. So I think that's a really interesting thing we can do for any navigation, is like maybe we want to flatten some of it, but not the whole thing.
Yeah.
Is that why there's the dashboard to try to put things in front of people?
Yes, and so Drupal CMS also now has there's again a dashboard that in Drupal that we can use, and it does definitely highlight some of the content as well. So that's another great technique for that wayfinding. Great. Well, if you have other ideas or thoughts, or you want to talk through one of these things for your own project, would love to chat more. So I'll be around the rest of the day. And thanks so much for coming and hearing me out on my 4 big ideas.
Thank you.